There was a work meeting, a routine meeting, the kind where someone presents a project, others listen, and most people stay half checked out. But there, in the middle of a quarterly results presentation, you felt your throat close up. It wasn't anything dramatic. It was just someone speaking with more emotion than expected, an unusual pause in their voice, a look that carried something most people in the room didn't catch. But you caught it. And before you could do anything about it, your eyes filled. You blinked fast, looked away, pretended to adjust something on your phone. The tear came down anyway, on quiet, low, along the side. But it came, and then arrived the thought you know so well. Why am I like this? It wasn't the first time. You've cried watching a television commercial. You felt your voice break in the middle of a conversation about something that, in theory, wasn't serious. You've been moved by a scene in a film that nobody around you seemed to notice. You've had to leave the room to pull yourself together after hearing a song that touched something you can't quite name. And every time, what comes with the emotion isn't just the emotion itself, it's the shame. It's the thought that something is wrong with you, that you're weak, that you're excessive, that you should have more control over yourself. Maybe you've tried. You've taken deep breaths, counted to 10, tried to distract yourself, tried to think about something else before the emotion could arrive. Sometimes it works. Sometimes the tear comes anyway, ignoring every effort you made. And the question that stays behind is, why is it like this for me? Why can't I just not feel so much? You know that moment before walking into a room full of people, when you already feel the weight of what's coming, that exhausting anticipation your body registers before the first contact even happens. That's not social anxiety. It's not shyness. It's not introversion. It's something more specific, more deep, and it's exactly what we're gonna talk about here. Because crying easily isn't the problem, it's the signal. And understanding what that signal means changes everything about how you'll live from here forward. If you're not subscribed to this channel yet, subscribe now. This is where psychology meets real life. No fluff, no easy answers. What most people believe about crying easily is that something is dysregulated in the emotions of someone who cries this way. That their emotional system is functioning incorrectly, that there's excess where there should be balance, that the ideal would be cleaner, more rational, more controlled emotional processing. This belief is so strong that it shaped how Western medicine and psychology looked at this trait for a very long time, as a problem to solve, a symptom to treat, a behavior to modify. But what neuroscience has discovered in recent decades tells a completely different story. There is a group of people, and consistent estimates point to somewhere between 15 and 20% of the global population, whose nervous systems process environmental stimuli with a depth significantly greater than average. It's not that this system is functioning incorrectly, it's that it functions with more intensity, with more layers of analysis, with more active connections between what is perceived externally and what is felt internally. When you hear that song, what your nervous system does is not simply register sound. It perceives the harmonic progression, the shift in vocal timbre, the emotional tension beneath the melody, what that song evokes in terms of memory and time, the quality of the silence between the notes. All of this happens in fractions of a second before your conscious thought can organize any reaction, and the body responds to the processing, not to the surface level stimulus. It responds to the deepest layer of what was felt. That's why the tear arrives before the thought. That's why you can't simply decide not to cry through willpower. The processing has already happened. The emotion has already moved through the system before you had a single word for it. The throat closes, the eyes fill, not because you're out of control, because your system registered more than most systems register, in less time. Researcher Elaine Aron formally named this trait in the 90s as sensory processing sensitivity, but what she identified using scientific instruments and laboratory protocols, the Japanese had understood for centuries through a different framework. Through concepts woven into their art, philosophy, literature, and the way they build relationships. Understanding these concepts changes the way you see yourself. It changes your relationship with what you feel. It changes, in the most practical and concrete sense possible, the quality of your inner life. But before we get there, it's necessary to understand the mechanism at the center of all of this. The mechanism nobody explained to you properly. The one responsible for the shame, the accumulation, and the emotional explosion you've probably experienced more than once. When you grew up hearing that you felt too much, that you were excessive, that you needed to be stronger, that this wasn't worth crying about, What happened wasn't merely a behavioral correction. It was an instruction your nervous system gradually internalized as fact. What I feel is too much for other people. What I feel needs to be filtered before it surfaces. Who I am on the inside is inconvenient. Notice the pattern that built. You learn to monitor yourself. You learn to sense the emotion coming and try to cut it off before it reached the surface. You learn to apologize for crying, to justify it, to minimize it. I'm fine. It's silly. I don't know why I did that. Excuse me. As if feeling were an inconvenience you needed to sort out alone so you wouldn't burden anyone. What psychology calls chronic emotional suppression, the systematic habit of blocking the expression of what you feel, has measurable physiological effects. It increases activity in the sympathetic nervous system, the body's alert system. It keeps the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for regulation and control, in a state of constant effort. It produces the familiar sensation of being perpetually a little tense, a little guarded, a little tired, without any obvious reason. You don't have an excess of emotion. You have an excess of repressed processing. The emotion that arrives is more intense because you feel at greater depth, but it's also more intense because it carries everything that was suppressed before. The tear that appears in an apparently small situation is often not only about that moment, it's the accumulation of everything you processed but were never allowed to express. This changes the fundamental question. The question is not how to stop crying. The question is, what is my system processing that I haven't yet brought to the surface? Notice what happens when you go too long without any space to process what you're feeling. Your patience shortens. Small things irritate you more than they should. A neutral comment starts to sting in a way that doesn't make sense. And then appears that cry that seems to have no reason, arriving while you're driving in traffic or in the shower at the end of the day. Without warning and without explanation. That's not loss of control. That's a pressure valve. That's the system doing what you didn't allow it to do consciously and voluntarily. And this is where the first central concept enters, coming from a tradition that learned centuries ago to treat this not as defect, but as sophisticated perception. Mono no aware, that's the name. In Japanese, the combination of words means something close to the patina of things, or the emotion that impermanence awakens. It's the feeling you have when you see a cherry blossom falling, when you realize that a phase of your life is ending, when you hear a song that carries a time that won't return, when you look at someone you love and think, even for just a second, that this moment will pass and can never be repeated. The Japanese didn't treat this feeling as a problem. They treated it as sophisticated perception, as a capacity to see what most people ignore because they're moving too fast, too distracted, too busy to notice. Mono no aware, in this tradition, is considered an elevated form of consciousness, not a vulnerability to be corrected. Those who feel this way perceive the beauty of things precisely because they perceive their fragility. Those who cry easily aren't exaggerating reality. They're feeling reality with more layers than most people are able to access. Think of it this way. There's a difference between seeing a painting and actually looking at it. Most people walk past. They notice there's a canvas on the wall. They identify the subject. They move on. Some people stop. They see the brushstroke. They feel the intention. They perceive what the artist was trying to say in the part that has no words. Those people are not better or worse. They are people who process more deeply. You process more deeply, and that has a real cost. The cost is that the world is more intense for you than for most people. It means stimuli that go unnoticed for others arrive at full volume for you. It means you exhaust faster in environments with too much noise, too many people, too much emotional demand, because your nervous system is working constantly, processing what others don't process. But there is also a gain that few people understand. There is the perception you carry, the ability to sense nuances in relationships, to notice when someone is not okay before that person says a single word, to form deep connections because you don't stay on the surface, to be moved profoundly by art, by stories, by nature, by things most people see and forget. The problem was never the trait. The problem was that the culture in which you grew up taught you that this trait is weakness. And Mono no aware is the first crack in that belief. It's evidence that an entire tradition looked at what you carry and said, this has a name, this has value, this has beauty, not in spite of the pain it brings, but also because of it. But naming isn't enough. Because after a lifetime of learning to hide what you feel, the most difficult change is not intellectual, it's relational. It's learning to exist in front of others without diminishing who you are to fit their expectations. And this is where the second concept enters, and it will ask something of you that can be uncomfortable at first. Amai. In Japanese, this word describes a specific form of emotional dependency that, in this culture, is valued as healthy and necessary in human relationships. The closest translation in English would be something like trusting yourself to another or allowing yourself to be supported. It's the willingness to show vulnerability to someone you trust, knowing that person will receive and hold it without judgment. In Japan, amai is not seen as weakness. It's considered a fundamental part of how deep relationships function. The capacity to show that you need something, that you're feeling something, that you're vulnerable. This is what creates genuine bonds between people. It's what distinguishes a surface relationship from one that truly sustains. What Western psychology spent decades proving empirically, Japanese psychology had already inscribed into culture. Shared vulnerability is the foundation of trust, not helplessness without choice, but the willingness to be honest about what you're feeling in front of someone you've chosen for that purpose. Not with everyone, with those who deserve it, in the right space, with the intention of real connection. Imagine for a moment how much energy you spend in a single week just containing what you're feeling, maintaining the right expression, not letting your voice tremble, laughing at the right moment even when what you want is to leave. Answering, "I'm fine," when the honest response would be longer and more complicated. That expenditure is real. It has a cost in the body, in your energy, in your capacity for presence. And it's precisely here that the emotional exhaustion you probably know well takes hold. Not as a character flaw, but as the direct result of a nervous system that processes enormously and releases very little. Amai is not crying in front of everyone without a filter. It's not turning every social interaction into a moment of emotional discharge. It's identifying the relationships where you can be honest about what you feel and cultivating those relationships with intention. It's learning that showing vulnerability in a safe space is not losing control. It's recovering integration between what you feel inside and what you can express outside. It's closing the distance between your inner life and your relational life. And when this happens, something interesting occurs with the emotional intensity you carry. It doesn't disappear, but it becomes less urgent, less explosive, less accumulated, because it found a way out before it had to force the valve. Consider this scene. You went through an intense week. Too much noise, too many demands, too much need to be present for everyone at once. Friday evening, you turn on the television, flip past a commercial with a small child and an old dog, and the tear comes before you realize what's happening. Are you going to judge yourself for that? Or are you going to understand that your nervous system spent the entire week processing without stop, that you didn't have a single real moment of relational release, and that your body simply did what it needed to do because it found no other path? The answer to this pattern isn't more rigidity, it's more awareness. It's understanding what the system needs before it has to handle it on its own. And this is where the third concept appears. The point where all of this becomes genuine practice rather than just understanding. Naikan means something close to looking inward. It's a structured practice of self-reflection developed in Japan in the 1940s by Isshin Yoshimoto, adapted both as a spiritual practice and a therapeutic tool. In its original form, the person spends days in silence revisiting specific relationships from their life through 3 questions. What did I receive from this person? What did I give to this person? What difficulties did I cause this person? But what matters here is not the ritual, it's the principle beneath it. The principle that emotional processing requires intentional space, that you cannot process while feeling and simultaneously reacting to the environment, that the highly sensitive nervous system especially requires regular intervals during which it can return inward without external demand, without constant stimulus, without the need to manage other people's perceptions. Notice what happens in your typical day. You wake up, the phone is there, notifications arrive, work arrives, conversations arrive, stimuli arrive, and the day runs until the moment you finally lie down, your head full of everything that came in, without a single moment between beginning and end where you stop to ask your own system, what am I actually feeling about everything that happened today? That missing interval is not a luxury. For the highly sensitive nervous system, it is maintenance. It's the equivalent of clearing what has been suspended before the system overloads. Without it, everything that was processed throughout the day stays half processed, creating a state of overwhelm that the body will try to resolve somehow. And sometimes that way is the tear that appears without warning at a moment you didn't choose, in front of people you didn't choose. about something that apparently has nothing to do with what you were feeling. The practice of Neiken in a contemporary and functional version is straightforward. It means reserving 10 to 15 minutes at the end of the day. No screen, no interaction, to let the day move through the mind with presence. Not to analyze or solve, but to feel what remains. What was heavy? What was beautiful? What bothered you? What moved you? To let the system complete what it began processing and didn't finish. No formal meditation is required, no specific breathing technique. There is only the act of stopping, of giving your system the space it needed all day long and didn't have. This doesn't eliminate the sensitivity. The sensitivity is who you are. What changes is the relationship with it. Instead of being caught off guard by emotions, you begin to know the rhythm of your own system. You begin to recognize when you're approaching your limit. You begin to create space before the limit is reached. And the difference between a person who feels deeply and has learned to inhabit that depth with awareness, and a person who feels deeply and lives at war with what they feel, is a difference that shows up in the quality of sleep, the quality of relationships, the quality of what you're able to create and offer to the world. There is still a fourth element, and it may be the most difficult to accept for someone who grew up learning to hide what they feel. It's the understanding that your sensitivity is not something to be cured. It's a system that requires the right conditions to function well, and that by itself is already a radical shift in perspective. Feel the difference between these two sentences. I'm too sensitive, I need to fix that. And I have a nervous system that processes in depth, and I need to create the right conditions for this system to function in a healthy way. The first sentence positions the trait as a defect requiring correction. The second positions it as a characteristic requiring understanding. The first creates shame. The second creates strategy. The science supporting this is clear. Sensory processing sensitivity is a temperamental trait with documented genetic and neurological basis. People with this trait show greater activity in specific regions of the brain during the processing of emotional stimuli, including the prefrontal cortex and the insula, the region associated with awareness of the body's internal state and with deep empathy. They have more active connections between the regions responsible for contextual analysis and those responsible for emotional response. This means that when you feel something, you are feeling more layers of that thing than most people feel, and the body registers those layers. The tear is not exaggeration, it's proportion. This trait exists across numerous animal species, suggesting it carries evolutionary value. Populations with individuals who process their environment more deeply, perceive dangers others miss, identify social nuances others overlook, and have creative and empathic capacities that emerge directly from this deeper processing. You are not a defective system. You are a type of system that nature preserved because it performs functions other systems don't perform in the same way. This doesn't eliminate any of the real difficulties. It remains true that the world is calibrated to an average level of processing that is not yours. It remains true that high sensory demand environments will cost you more than they cost most people. It remains true that you will need more recovery time after intense interactions, that you will need silence more frequently, that you will need relationships that can hold your depth rather than asking you to make yourself smaller. But here is what is also true, and what is rarely said with the clarity it deserves. You have a capacity for perception that most people do not have. You read someone's emotional state before that person knows they're feeling something. You create in depth because you process in depth. You love in ways that go beyond the surface because nothing in your system knows how to stay there. And when you learn to create the right conditions for your system to function well, instead of forcing it to function like someone else's system, something shifts in a way you'll feel in your body, not just understand in your head. One thing worth saying, gently but honestly, if what you feel reaches a point where it significantly interferes with your daily life, seeking professional support is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign that you took seriously what you feel. This content does not replace that care, but it may be the beginning of an understanding that changes what you ask for when you seek help. See how these four elements connect into a structure that goes beyond each individual concept. Mono No Aware gave you a name and a tradition for what you carry, showing that your sensitivity was recognized centuries ago as sophisticated perception, not as defect. The neurological mechanism of sensory processing sensitivity showed you that what you experience has a measurable physical substrate, that the tear is not emotional excess, but a proportional response to the processing that happens in you before any thought takes form. Amai showed you that shared vulnerability in safe relationships is not a loss of control. It's the path toward integration between the life you live inside and the life you can live outside, reducing the accumulation that creates the pressure you know well. And Niken gave you the concrete practice of creating intentional space for that processing to complete itself consciously before it needs to explode in a moment you didn't choose. Together, these 4 elements don't promise to transform you into a different person. They promise something more real than that you will come to live with who you already are, with less war, with more understanding, with the sense that what you feel has a place and a meaning rather than being a constant problem you carry without resolution. The tear doesn't disappear, but it loses the weight of shame. It stops being proof of weakness and becomes a signal that you are present, that you are processing, that your system is functioning exactly as it was built to function. And that shift, for someone who spent their life apologizing for feeling too much, is a shift that goes far beyond the cry. It's a shift in your relationship with your own existence. If you know someone who also carries that feeling of sensing more than they should, of something being wrong because emotions arrive fast and deep, share this with them, not because it will resolve what they feel, but because sometimes what we need most is to hear that what we feel makes sense. In the next video, we're going to enter territory that few people address with honesty, how the highly sensitive mind processes conflict, and why for some people a small argument can leave emotional traces that last for days. You won't want to miss it. You don't feel too much. You feel for real, and there is an enormous difference between those two things.